What's up guys, welcome back to the channel and to another weekly 3D model. This week we're going to be making a harpoon gun, so let's just dive into it. Now just before we get started, I want to give a huge thank you to all of my Patreons and to everyone who has subscribed. I really can't thank you all enough. We're slowly approaching my goal of 10,000 subscribers, so if you'd like to help me get there and you want to see more 3D content and 3D models, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. So for this week, I wanted to make something a bit more beginner friendly, and I wanted to make a video showing how easily you can throw together some shapes and quickly create your own 3D models. As you can see with this model, a lot of the shapes are pretty straightforward. I didn't want to make things too complex, so it's basically just a bunch of squares, rectangles, and cylinders scaled in different sizes. Now, I'm no weapons artist by any means, but I did see an image online of a harpoon gun, and I thought it'd be really fun to create one of my own. So I used various images online as reference. I saw one in particular from Fast and the Furious 6 where they use a sci-fi looking harpoon gun, so I decided that was the direction I was going to take it. Now because I didn't know exactly how I wanted it to look, you'll see throughout this video I experiment with a few different ideas along the way and try messing around with a few different things as I try to piece together this harpoon gun. Not having a clear idea of what I wanted before starting this model definitely dragged out the process a little bit, like it usually does, but I'm still happy with how it turned out. Now, like I mentioned, I didn't want to create a really super high poly model, so I wanted to make this harpoon gun on the lower poly side of things and add a lot of those details in the materials, which can definitely be challenging trying to make it not look too plain or boring. That being said, I still added a few things like bolts and screws to help make it look a little bit more realistic, which quickly adds up the polys in the scene. So if I was going to use this in a video game or something, I would definitely remove all of those and save on all of those polys. I was actually tempted to make a lower poly game model from this after I created this higher poly one, just by simply removing some of those bevels and screws, but I just didn't have a lot of time this weekend, so we're just going to go with this one model for today. Now this video is just going to be a time-lapse speed modeling video, but I will jump in here and there to explain a few of the small things I'm doing. This 3D model and Substance Painter working files along with a real-time video will all be uploaded to my Patreon page, so if you're interested in seeing any of those, you can find them in the link in the description below. Alright, enough of me talking, let's just continue blocking things out and we can slowly piece together this harpoon gun. Alright, so here is the model in its finished form. Now really quickly before we do those textures, I'm just going to go over exactly how I did those UVs and how I grouped everything together. Now if you're interested in seeing the full UV mapping process, I will be uploading that video to my Patreon page, which you can find in the link in the description below. Now as you probably already noticed, I did add a few small things to this model when I was doing those UVs. Now one of the biggest things I added was this cord or wire on the back. Now when I was looking at this model, not only did it look just a little bit plain on the back, but I was wondering how this rope holder would basically wind it in. And there was no handle that you could wind anything, and it just didn't really make sense if you looked at it. So I thought it'd be cool if it was more sci-fi, or if it just had some sort of mechanism that was hydraulic and it could just do this mechanically, maybe by one of these switches on the back. So I just decided to add just a simple EP curve tool and made a sweet mesh. And then I made it just fairly low in polys, so it's nothing too crazy. And I just decided to add one more over here, just to, once again, add some more geometry to the scene and hopefully make it more appealing to the eye. So what I decided to do was split this thing up into two different groups for the two textures applied. Now to be honest, a model this size probably only needs one material applied. Now, because this model is just being used for this YouTube video, I just decided to split this thing up into two different materials. That way I can hopefully get a little bit more resolution and detail out of those textures. So the very first group and material is the body. Now, like I said earlier, I did go through when I was cleaning all of these shapes up and tried to reduce some of those polys, but if I was to use this in a video game, I would just make a whole other model alongside of this. I would basically duplicate this harpoon gun over. I would zoom in and just remove all of these tiny bevels and all these edges and a lot of these bolts. And then you can just project some of these details and materials from this higher poly mesh onto your lower poly mesh. Now, I just didn't have a lot of time to create a whole other mesh. It's just a lot more work to do that high and low poly workflow. So we're just gonna go with this one harpoon gun. Now the second group is the second texture, and that's just the front and end. Like I said, I wanted a little bit more resolution and detail, so I thought maybe I should split these things over into their own group. Now I had a lot of extra room to work with, so I just tried to take advantage of all that space and really make sure that my UV shells were taking up most of that empty space. But it's pretty straightforward. Like I said, if you're interested in seeing the whole process, that will be on my Patreon page. But for now, let's just jump over to Substance Painter and we can start texturing. Alright, so now jumping over to Substance Painter, we can go ahead and load in our FBX file from Maya. Now when it came to the textures, this one was definitely challenging. The model seemed pretty straightforward, but for some reason I just was very indecisive. I did not know how I wanted it to look. I just kept thinking different things along the way, so it really dragged out the whole texturing process. I mean, some weeks you're on your game, some weeks you're off. This week I definitely felt off. So you'll see as I'm attempting to texture this harpoon gun, I just keep having to throw on different smart materials and different materials just so I can try to get something going. For some reason, I just wasn't happy with how it was looking, so I kept on having to come back to tweak things until I finally got it into a state that I was happy with. Now, I was using that one reference photo that I use on Google, so I did have some sort of guidance or some sort of direction I was working towards. The photo just had some plain metals, so it was something to work with, but I definitely wanted to hopefully make it more interesting. So like I said, there was definitely a lot of experimenting when it came to this week's model. So when it comes to texturing all of my 3D models, I really like to fill in all of those empty meshes fairly quickly, and then I can come back and start refining things. I always find it's easier for myself to visualize how I want it to look when I have some sort of base material set in place. Now that doesn't mean the first material you throw on is going to be the correct one, but it's always nice to start throwing different things on to start seeing how things are looking. Now at the very end of this texturing process, I thought I was finished, but because I never know when to quit, the following day when I was just piecing together this video, I really just wasn't happy with a few small things. Now I'll go over those at the end of the video, and I decided to add a few small quick details. So enough of me talking and dragging this thing on, let's just continue filling these meshes with materials and we can texture this harpoon gun. Alright, so we're at the end of the texturing process, and to be honest, I thought I was going to wrap things up, but like I mentioned at the beginning, I came back the next day and I actually decided to change a few small things. So let's quickly go over exactly what I did. Alright, so I didn't change too much, but I did change a few small things, and one of those things was this handle. Now the handle was looking very plain. I actually didn't really add anything to it. It was just a plain material on top of that. So I originally started just by adding these small little indents, these tiny screws, and then I just decided to add this sort of grip pattern on the front and back. And that was fairly straightforward. It was just by adding a fill layer, and then just by turning off the base color and adjusting that height map, I could just basically increase that slider so I can have a nice bump effect. And then I went over to my textures tab, chose some sort of cool texture pattern, and then I believe I used this tile generator filter, and I basically just set that to my height map, and then I just painted on exactly where I wanted them. Now I did have a seam at the back here, so I decided just to work with that and just erase a nice cut along the middle. That way I can blend in that seam. And besides that little tiny detail, I also decided to add a few extra bumps into the geometry just to add some more variation of shape. It was looking a little bit plain, so I thought those tiny little details just could go a long way. And another small thing I added was just these little markers or little symbols on top of the mesh. Once again, I thought it was looking plain, and I added that symbol here that was stamped into the metal, so I thought it was some sort of branding I could just use in other places on the model. Once again, just to try to hopefully make it more interesting to look at. Other than that, everything was the exact same, and I'm pretty happy actually with how it turned out. So I really hope you guys enjoyed this week's video. If you did, give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe to see more weekly 3D content. Also, if you're interested in seeing this whole video in a real-time pace, I will be uploading that to my Patreon page, and it will also include the whole UV mapping process. So if that's something that interests you, you can find that in the link in the description below. Also, don't forget to check out my website, polyrendr.com. It's a really great way to help support this channel and wear some polyrender clothes in the real world. So if you feel like spreading the word around the world, you can also find that in the link in the description below. Alright, thanks so much for tuning in. I really hope you guys enjoyed this week's video, and I will catch you in the next one.